how many people I know. I'll make this a bit shorter, so we can all get to the food. Talking in empty stomach. So I had a slightly different career. I don't know about, does any one of you in here know already what they want to be and they're sure about? Some of you. Because that was my case. I didn't meander around. When I was about 15, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I am what I thought back then I wanted to do, which was being a neuroscientist. I was always good at looking at, I never cared about machines. I always looked at human beings, and I find them much more fascinating. Anything about medicine or engineering never interests me. And within psychology, those people who know me, who had me for history and systems or neuroscience, they know that I'm a hardcore mechanistic thinker. I think about mechanisms. So it led me to neuroscience. I never considered anything else, really. I never looked right, I never looked left. I never cared about any of the other stuff in psychology. Well, I teach you other stuff, but personally, for me, I didn't care about any of the applied stuff. Yeah, all the I.O. people, I couldn't care less for the bunch. Yeah, I never cared, really. I'm a theoretical person, and AUB decided, for some reason, actually to pay me money for my thoughts. And that's what I come home, I sit down, I switch on the lights, and I start thinking. And they pay me for that. It's called research officially, but that's actually what they do. So I was born and raised in Germany, but I went to the US, and academically I'm American. And I went to the University of Georgia. It had to do because how my family went to Georgia. And UGA back then, University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia, it's just outside of Atlanta, had a very bad reputation back then. It was a very bad school. Now it's a bit better, I think. They had that joke that when you were an undergraduate, if you drive through Athens, that's a little town where UGA is at, and you roll down your window, and you drive slow enough to throw a diploma into your car. So after mostly drinking, watching football, slicing a few rat brains, and chasing women, they gave me a degree after all. And I decided I really liked it. So I decided that I stay there for my PhD, which is what I did. So I don't have 22 slides, and I'm not going to tell you my daydreams either. So a few things about neuroscience. Because neuroscience has become very, very sexy recently, in the last 10 or 15 years or so. When I did neuroscience, late 80s, early 90s, it was a different field, because you actually still had to cut rat brains or cheap brains and do research on a wet bench. And there was laboratory work, and it was 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, doing one slice after another. And you had to learn a lot of neuroanatomy, neurochemistry, neurophysiology. Today it's a little bit different with the function MRIs and the PET scans. You can do this all on a computer, and theoretically it's an entirely different thing. It also has gotten very, very, very competitive. Those of you who are interested in this will notice very quickly it is almost impossible to get into a PhD program in the United States straight from your undergraduate degree. And that's because it's about, I think after clinical psychology, the second most difficult degree program to get into. So for those of you who are interested in it, you face a completely different competition and an uphill battle that I never looked at. I decided I wanted to do this, so I did this. I never had to face this. But I think you, or those of you who decide to do it and want to get into graduate school, you're mostly screwed. Because the way we did this back then was just we decided, oh, I want to go there, and that's what we did. You, I think, looking at a completely different environment. And that makes psychology very, very competitive. And I think that means the advice that I could give you for your future career is very different than the kind of advice that I got when I was an undergraduate student. When I was a graduate student, I did traditional, normal neuroscience. That means my main topic was memory. I worked on memory, which I don't do anymore. And I worked on rats and mice, and I did a lot of behavioral paradigms, and also a lot of stuff in terms of reinforcement paradigms and behavioral modification with rats. I'm a Skinner box. you stand there, and there's a rat in a box, yeah? And when they press a lever, you reinforce the rat. And you do that for 8 hours a day until you shake the rat, yeah? And then you take the rat, yeah? Open it up, it needs the brain, put some electrode in it, or slice it, dice it, or something, yeah? But what fascinated me is the deductions that you can make, understanding the brain mechanisms where all of your behavior comes from. I now work mostly on stuff that interests me, because memory back then was something that I did, primarily because that's where the money was, in terms of funding. And you'll see this, that much of what you do depends on where funds are. And most of that, at least for us in psychology, also in medicine, is in diseases. Because at least in the United States, but also in Europe and England in particular, most of the money comes for funding research that is directly related to a disease. I can't stand disease. I can't stand any of the neuroscience that's related to disease. My students know that. Although most of the questions I get have to deal with how schizophrenia works in the brain, or Alzheimer's disease, or anxiety disorder, or depression, I work on the brain as it is fully functioning. So my research looks more at what happens during peak experience, consciousness, creativity, that sort of thing, and that's the kind of research I do. For that, it's a luxury, really. I cannot work in more than 10 countries, and if it weren't for AUB, Lebanon wouldn't be one of them. Yeah? Because there's very little funding in what I do, and that means that very few countries can afford the luxury of people like me. That means people who work as, in terms of basic science, fundamental research, that has, as far as I can tell, nothing I do has any sort of applied immediate effect. Neither in clinical psychology, nor in I/O, nor in testing. Everything I do, I cannot see possibly the value of this in at least not my lifetime. But what interests me is to understand fundamental mechanisms. So doing basic research, like a theoretical physicist, I'm mostly a theoretical neuroscientist. I did a lot of applied work early on. I do less and less and less as I get older, but it still interests me. That's not the sort of stuff that I do. A question I often get is how I got to Lebanon. And actually, I can't remember anymore. I got there somehow. Actually, it was. I had my first job also in Georgia. I stayed there for too long, and at the time, most of my life was going south, work-wise, relationship-wise. I couldn't stand my colleagues; they couldn't stand me. So I decided to leave. I have family all over the place, in the US and Germany and New Zealand. So I applied all over the world to get jobs. And I got a few. And one of them I got was from this place I never heard of, called AUB. So I figured, yeah, I'm going to take a look at it. So they flew me in, yeah, and I looked at the campus, and I saw the Mediterranean, and then I realized you had mountains and ocean and good food and good weather, except for the day, yeah. And, you know, I looked at the women. I was single at the time. Okay, that works for me. And I can, okay? Why I am still here, I can't tell you less of that. I really don't know. I don't know. Why are you still here? I get this question a lot, because I find that funny, but a lot of people, a lot of Lebanese, they would like to leave as soon as possible. Yeah? So they can't even less understand how somebody who doesn't have to be here is here. I can't tell you an answer, but I'm still here. For now. With that, I make it short. Who's up next? Dr. Hussein, please. You don't have to come up.